Mr. President, we are meeting at a critical moment for international law and order and for human rights. The ongoing Russia's aggression against Ukraine, accompanied by massive human rights violations, war crimes and crimes against humanity unseen since the Second World War, is a deliberate destruction of the UN Charter with human rights at its center. As Kremlin's plan to conquer Ukraine continues to fail, and Ukrainian defenders keep liberating our territories, Russia, with its nuclear threats, put the world on the edge of unthinkable. Russia's shelling of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, Europe's biggest nuclear power station, exposed the entire continent to a nuclear danger. Russia's hunger and energy games leave the people around the world in fear and insecurity. All these actions represent an egregious affront to human rights of every person in every continent and must be strongly rejected. Acting High Commissioner's update and the office's report on the situation in Ukraine clearly testify to the severely destructive impact of Russia's war on the human rights of the Ukrainian people. Every single day of more than 7 months of Russia's unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression brings unspeakable suffering to every Ukrainian household. Innocent people are being killed, their homes, their lives are being destroyed on direct orders from terrorist number one. Just a few days ago, 16 Russian missiles killed 30 and injured more than 100 people in a civilian convoy in Zaporizhzhia. A 3-year-old boy was wandering among the debris, desperately trying to find his parents, who were mercilessly killed by the Russian army. In the Dnipro region, in the small village, the Russian rocket hit the private house, leaving a crater dozens of meters wide and deep. A grandmother, mother, 12-year-old daughter and 8-year-old son were killed. The human remnants were scattered on the roofs of neighboring houses, while the orphaned elderly dog was looking for his owners on the ruins. A mass grave with 440 Ukrainian bodies with the signs of torture found in the liberated Izium was another testimony of numerous war crimes committed in Ukraine by Russia. Nearly 1/5 of Ukraine's territory, with thousands of towns and villages, remains occupied by Russia. The full scale of violations in those areas will become clear only after their liberation. Russian forces are sending Ukrainian citizens to filtration camps before forcibly relocating them to Russia in violations of Geneva Conventions. Those people are not refugees. They are forcibly deported people who must be returned home. Russia organized illegal mass adoption of the Ukrainian children after they had been forcibly transferred from occupied territories of Ukraine to Russia. We are talking about 200,000 Ukrainian children who have been deprived of their right to have a decent childhood in their homeland. These are the war crimes and crimes against humanity for which Russia will be held accountable. This is the reality for millions of Ukrainians who make a plea to the world not to remain silent, not to be neutral, not to be complacent in the face of the evil. Mr. President, by forcing people to fill out the election ballots at gunpoint in the sham so-called referenda in Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Lugansk and Donetsk regions, Russia has yet again committed a crime against citizens' right for free and fair elections. The grotesque attempt to annex part of Ukraine's territory will not have any legal consequences for Ukraine's sovereign territory or internationally recognized borders. Neither will it change anything for Ukrainian defenders, who will continue to liberate all our territories and our people. One more atrocious war crime perpetrated by Russia is the illegal conscription of people on the territory it controls into the Russian armed forces, forcing them to fight against their own state. In the occupied Crimea, Russia deliberately focuses its mobilization on Crimean Tatars, who received over 80% of Russian draft notices. It is nothing but ethnic cleansing of the peninsula of the indigenous people disloyal to Moscow. The recent draconian verdict of 70 years in prison to first deputy chairman of the Majlis Nariman Jilal for participation in the Crimean Platform Summit, coupled with 15 and 13 years of imprisonment for brothers Akhtemovs, expose Moscow's fear of the local resistance to occupation of the peninsula. Russia breaks every possible rule, violates international legal order and core human rights principle. It doesn't deserve a seat in any international multilateral institution for its deep deep contempt for multilateralism. We will not stop until we liberate our territories, and we will hold Russia accountable for their crimes against the Ukrainian people. We must do it together for the sake of world justice and peace. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Informo que la lista de oradores está cerrada. Comenzamos con aquellas delegaciones interesadas en hacer comentarios o formular preguntas. Comenzamos con Estonia en nombre de un grupo de países. Su Excelencia Urmas Reinsalu, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Estonia. Por video.
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the Nordic Baltic countries. Each day, the world witnesses the horror of Russia's continuously committed atrocities in Ukraine. Since the full-scale invasion, over a million Ukrainians have been unlawfully deported to Russia or unlawfully forcibly displaced to Russian-occupied territories. Ukrainian children are unlawfully deported for illegal adoptions in Russia. We urge Russia to abide by its obligations under international law and end these unlawful deportations of Ukrainian civilians, including of children. The aggressor's brutal network of filtration camps masks hideous abuses and violations of human rights and international humanitarian law. Women and girls face rape, sexual violence and abuse. We stand with Ukraine and commit ourselves to the pursuit of justice and accountability for Russia's trail of criminality in Ukraine. We will never recognize Russia's illegal sham referenda in Ukraine's occupied territories and their illegitimate annexation. All states are under an international law obligation to not recognize this illegal annexation. I thank you.
Thank you. Tiene la palabra Unión Europea.
Mr. President, the European Union thanks the Director for the update and expresses its support to the work of the Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine. We reiterate our strong condemnation of all violations of international law committed in the context of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. As anywhere else in this world, such violations require a firm condemnation by all UN members, and all perpetrators must be held accountable. The atrocities, destruction and suffering in Ukraine, unleashed by this flagrant violation of the UN Charter, have led to human rights challenges across the world by causing global economic, food and energy crisis. Russia's responsibility for that crisis is unquestionable. We all need to face the consequences together, first and foremost by helping countries hit the most, as well as vulnerable persons. The European Union is committed to global solidarity and is facilitating new routes for grain exports from Ukraine and mobilising the support in response to food insecurity of more than €7.7 billion until 2024. We also put forward a response plan on solidarity lanes, combining different strands of action, including trade, agriculture and humanitarian. We urge Russia to abide by its obligations under international law and stop its aggression against Ukraine entirely, unconditionally and immediately. Thank you.
Thank you. Tiene la palabra Dinamarca en nombre de un grupo de países.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm delivering this statement on behalf of the 46 member states of the Group of Friends of Accountability following the aggression against Ukraine. We condemn in the strongest possible terms Russia's illegal sham referenda in Ukraine and the announced illegal attempted annexation of 4 regions of Ukraine. We are equally devastated by the discoveries of mass graves in the formerly Russian-controlled areas. We remain deeply alarmed about the continuing and widespread reports of human rights abuses and violations of international humanitarian law, including those stemming from Russia's reported filtration policy. The filtration operations are reported to include practices of torture of civilians and military forces, as well as the separation of families, including forced adoption of Ukrainian children, confiscation of Ukrainian passports, issuing of Russian passports, and surveillance. Evidence is mounting that Russian authorities are also reportedly detaining or making disappear thousands of Ukrainian civilians during the filtration processes, with reports that some civilians have been summarily executed. We call on Russia to immediately halt its pervasive filtration operations, arbitrary detention and forced deportations and disappearances. We reaffirm our unwavering commitment to the independent sovereignty and respect for the territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. We have a longer statement which we'll upload on the internet on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Tiene la palabra Soberana Orden de Malta. Soberana Orden de Malta. Está en la sala. Pasamos a Noruega. Embajadora.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the Director for presenting the report. The content is highly disturbing. In territories liberated from Russian occupation, OHCHR has documented the killing of civilians by Russian armed forces. Men, women and children have been executed, tortured and unlawfully detained, and a large number have disappeared. Among the enforced disappearances, there are public officials, journalists and civil society activists who appear to have been deliberately targeted. There are horrific accounts of Russia's use of conflict-related sexual violence, and the High Commissioner's report confirms several cases. This seems to be used as a tactic of war. Norway condemns all use of sexual violence.
atroces sont massives et systématiques. À Izium et dans tant d'autres lieux, des atrocités insoutenables ont été perpétrées. Ces exactions doivent faire l'objet d'enquêtes impartiales et indépendantes. Un accès sûr et sans entrave doit être garanti à tous les mécanismes internationaux d'enquête et de surveillance des droits de l'homme à l'ensemble du territoire de l'Ukraine, dans ses frontières internationalement reconnues. Nous le rappelons, il n'y aura pas de paix sans justice. La France rejette et condamne avec la plus grande fermeté l'annonce par le président Poutine de l'annexion illégale des régions ukrainiennes de Donetsk, Louhansk et de parties des régions de Kherson et Zaporijia au sein de la Fédération de Russie. Ni cette escalade, ni cette décision unilatérale de la Russie ne changeront quoi que ce soit à l'engagement total de la France et de ses partenaires à soutenir l'Ukraine dans son combat légitime et nécessaire pour défendre sa souveraineté et son intégrité territoriale. La France continuera d'apporter un soutien concret à l'Ukraine, notamment à travers la fourniture d'aide humanitaire. Nous nous tiendrons aux côtés de l'Ukraine aussi longtemps qu'il le faudra. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Tiene la palabra Macedonia del Norte. Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the High Commissioner for the comprehensive report on the human rights situation in Ukraine. North Macedonia strongly condemns and renounces Russia's military invasion against Ukraine, which led to irreparable loss of life and material damage. The ongoing assaults by Russian forces have resulted in a dire human rights situation across the country, including infringement on the enjoyment of the rights to health, work, education, housing and freedom of religion or belief. We are seriously concerned about the arbitrary detention and enforced disappearances of representatives of local authorities, journalists, civil society activists and other civilians by Russian armed forces. We are appalled by the use of torture and ill treatment of civilian detainees by Russian security forces and affiliated armed groups, which was documented in the report. We call on Russia to immediately end its war of aggression against Ukraine and to respect the fundamental principle of international human rights law and international humanitarian law. North Macedonia condemns Russia's proclaimed annexation of parts of Ukraine and reiterates its support for the sovereignty, territorial integrity and independence of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Thank you.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Australia. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Australia thanks the Director for presenting the disturbing oral update. Australia condemns in the strongest possible terms Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its violations of international law. We remain appalled by the continuing horrific acts perpetrated by Russian forces in Ukraine. The sickening discovery of mass civilian burial sites near Izium is yet more evidence of Russia's egregious war crimes, which include torture, mass executions, rape, including of children, deliberate shelling of civilians and forced deportations. Russia's sham referenda in occupied areas of Ukraine are illegitimate and have no legal effect. The regions of Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson and Zaporizhia are sovereign Ukrainian territory. President Putin's annexation is illegal, and any claims that these territories are now part of Russia are baseless and false. Any annexation of a state's territory is a violation of international law, including the UN Charter. This is a dangerous escalation of Russia's illegal war. Director, how can Russia be held accountable for its illegitimate and illegal attempt to annex Ukrainian territory? And how can the human rights of the Ukrainian people be protected? Thank you.
Thank you. Je donne la parole à Luxembourg.
Monsieur le Président, le Luxembourg s'associe à la déclaration de l'Union européenne et remercie le Haut-Commissariat pour son compte-rendu oral. Pendant 8 ans, le BHCDH a documenté la situation des droits humains en Ukraine de manière impartiale et fiable. Une fois de plus, nous condamnons ici les violations répétées, intentionnelles et ciblées du droit international des droits humains et du droit international humanitaire par les forces russes en Ukraine. Ces violations sont perpétrées de manière systématique dans les régions occupées illégalement par la Russie, y compris en Crimée. Le seul moyen d'y mettre fin est la libération immédiate et inconditionnelle de ces régions. Nous appelons ainsi la Russie à retirer ces troupes du territoire ukrainien internationalement reconnues sans délai et sans précondition, ainsi qu'à mettre en œuvre immédiatement les mesures conservatoires ordonnées par la Cour internationale de justice le 16 mars dernier. Les différentes entités pertinentes de l'ONU, dont le Haut-Commissariat, doivent accompagner la libération des territoires occupés dans le cadre de leurs mandats respectifs. En outre, tous les pays ont une responsabilité pour contribuer à la mise en place de mécanismes de redevabilité pour garantir que les coupables des crimes de guerre et des crimes contre l'humanité à tous les niveaux soient traduits en justice et rendent des comptes pour leurs actes. Finalement, permettez-moi de réitérer ce qu'a dit le secrétaire général de l'ONU. Toute annexion est une violation claire et inacceptable des principes de la Charte des Nations Unies et du droit international. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Tiene la palabra Lituania. Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. President. Lithuania fully aligns itself with the EU statement. We greatly appreciate the work of the Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine and thank the Director for the update. Now more than ever, humanitarian, technical and financial support to Ukraine are of exceptional importance as the country continues suffering from Russia's war of aggression, aided by its accomplice Belarus. Committed war crimes and other grave violations of international law are causing a humanitarian and human rights catastrophe with far-reaching consequences across the globe. Lithuania will never recognize Russia's illegal sham referenda in Ukraine's occupied territories and their illegitimate annexation, including Crimea. We reiterate our firm support for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. The human rights situation in the occupied territories has deteriorated significantly under Russian occupation. We strongly condemn Russia's systematic violation of all human rights and fundamental freedoms in the occupied territories, including the persecution of persons belonging to religious, ethnic and other minorities, in particular Crimean Tatars. Illegal conscription and mobilization by Russia in the temporary occupied territories of Ukraine, including in Crimea, specifically targeting its indigenous Tatar population, is yet another violation of international humanitarian law and a war crime, for which full accountability must be ensured. Mr. Director, what would be the most effective ways to support Crimean Tatars and other persecuted minorities? I thank you.
Thank you. Tiene la palabra Venezuela por Zoom.
Gracias, presidente. El tema 10 de la agenda del Consejo de Derechos Humanos fue concebido para abordar la asistencia técnica y el fomento de la capacidad, contando siempre con el concurso del país concernido, para poder así contribuir a mejorar la situación de los derechos humanos en el terreno, en consonancia con los principios del diálogo genuino y la cooperación, que son pilares fundamentales de la labor de este Consejo. La resolución que dio lugar a este diálogo bajo el mencionado tema 10 nada tiene que ver con la asistencia técnica y el fomento de la cooperación en materia de derechos humanos, lo cual evidencia el uso politizado que se pretende dar a este Consejo, desnaturalizando el mandato que nos ha sido confiado. En tal sentido, rechazamos una vez más la utilización de espacios tan importantes como lo es el tema 10 de la agenda del Consejo, para fines contrarios a los que fue concebido, incentivando la selectividad, la politización y los dobles estándares que socavan la credibilidad de este órgano de las Naciones Unidas. Nos seguiremos oponiendo firmemente a las iniciativas fundadas en motivaciones políticas que en nada contribuyen a la promoción y protección de los derechos humanos, ni prestan beneficio alguno en favor de las víctimas. Venezuela reitera su compromiso con la promoción y protección de todos los derechos humanos universales, indivisibles, interdependientes e interrelacionados, incluido el derecho al desarrollo, de manera imparcial, objetiva y transparente, con base en los principios del respeto a la soberanía y la no injerencia en los asuntos internos. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra Федерация Руса.
Господин председатель, ознакомились с содержанием 34-го доклада УВКПЧ по ситуации с правами человека на Украине. Отмечаем однобокий и несбалансированный характер представленного документа, который отражает западные подходы к освещению украинского кризиса. Сожалеем, что у управления не хватает смелости проявить принципиальный подход и честно рассказать о всех военных преступлениях, преступлениях против человечности и нарушениях прав человека, ответственность за которые несет киевский режим. Так, в отношении инцидента в Еленовке в докладе сухо констатируется, что в результате обстрела СИЗО ранено более 100 заключенных, несколько десятков погибло. О том, что уничтожение содержавшихся в этой колонии украинских военнопленных был произведен вооруженными силами Украины, ни слова. При этом обратили внимание, что даже в этом опубликованном по западным лекалам докладе констатируется неизбирательное использование вооруженными силами Украины тяжелого вооружения, размещение военной техники вблизи гражданских объектов, жестокое обращение с военнопленными, преследование Киевом так называемых «изменников», случаи насильственных исчезновений, проблемы в области отправления правосудия, а также направленные на запрет оппозиционных сил законодательные нововведения. С сожалением констатируем, что УВКПЧ подает эту информацию в размытом и неопределенном ключе, чем только развязывает руки киевскому режиму и способствует его безнаказанности. Благодарю за внимание.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra Países Bajos.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Kingdom of the Netherlands aligns itself with the EU statement. The Netherlands thanks the OHCHR and the monitoring mission for its important, factual and balanced briefing on the situation of the human rights situation in Ukraine. We are appalled by the repeated discoveries of mass graves in Ukraine since Russia launched its war of aggression, and we are shocked to hear that evidence increasingly points to the perpetration of numerous war crimes by Russian military forces. Not only must Russia put an end to its blatant violation of human